don't know if Edward went. Edward didn't go. Well, I hate to see that he's not here. That means he's not feeling well. I have to check on him. We're in 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Dearly beloved, agapatoi. It's a evocative case here. He's talking to the dearly beloved, and they are dearly beloved. Why? Well, if you back up just a verse or two, you can see that they are a chosen generation, verse 9. We, ye, me, you. If you've obeyed the gospel, you're a chosen generation, a royal priest. Should be a particular or peculiar person. And so as a result of that, we're going to have a challenge given to us from Peter, and that is to abstain and also to attain. And so that'll be our theme tonight as we talk about abstaining from the lusts of the flesh that we don't want to have, then the attaining the good things in life that we do want to have and show. Let's go ahead and look at the two verses. He says, dearly beloved. It's all one word in the Greek. I beseech you as strangers. This word is a compound word, para, beside, oikos, which is a house. And that means that we live beside. We're not with these folks, but we live beside them. Just like Abraham was a ger in Hebrew, an alien. We are aliens in this world, even though we live next door to people that are in the world. And that brings me to something that we need to think about, brethren. We have a gospel meeting coming up in which we will have someone who nobody knows, lives away from the community, who is going to come in and is going to preach the gospel. He doesn't have an axe to grind or doesn't know anybody. This would be a perfect opportunity for you to ask your neighbors, a family member, a friend, say, why don't you come to our gospel meeting? All they can do is say no, and then you can ask somebody else. But let's try to do that, because if we're not having folks visit us or we're not having Bible studies, then we are not going to grow. That's just the bottom line. That's how you grow, by teaching people. And if we can't make contact with people, then you don't have prospects, then we're not going to grow. So we need to, ask people, encourage people to come to, instead of, even maybe set up Bible studies. Maybe I'll open your home or open my home. That wouldn't bother me. But we have a facility here where we can come and conduct a Bible study. But we need to do that. We live next door to people who are not members of the Lord's church, who are not Christians. They're never going to find the Christ if someone doesn't point them in the right direction. And not many people today who even wear the name Christian are going to be able to show them the truth like you can. So he says, as strangers, people that we live beside, and as pilgrims. The word there is a compound Greek word as well, paradigmos or didymos, and that means to walk around. We walk beside these people as well. We're strangers. We live in this strange land. It's not our home. We're just a passing through, as the old song goes. And we're out in the world every day. We walk beside people who don't know the Christ. We work beside them. We maybe go to school with them, sit beside them in school. They don't know Jesus. They don't know the truth. These are folks, this is great contact. The biggest source of people that have contact with people are young folks and old folks. We have a lot of opportunities there. We need to try to take advantage of those. So as strangers and pilgrims, abstain. This word abstain is a compound word. It's two. Apo is a preposition, means away, and echo is the word I have. And so you combine those two, and this is to have or to keep away. Literally means keep off, prevent, to hold back. You have to have the intestinal fortitude to stay away from certain things. There's certain things out there that are going to try to give you a hard time. And so we need to abstain from these things. Don't even put ourselves in a position to be around those things. 1 Thessalonians 5:22, we see this abstain from phrase used no less than 5 times in the New Testament. 1 Thessalonians 5:22, abstain from the very appearance of evil. In other words, if it even looks evil, you stay away from it. Acts 15:20 and 29, they were writing a letter to the Gentiles that they abstain from idols, that they abstain from meats offered to idols. 1 Thessalonians 4 at verse 3, abstain from fornication. And then a false use of abstaining. Somebody's trying to get somebody to abstain from meats, which they have a right to eat. Remember 1 Timothy chapter 4 at verse 3, there will be those who will command others to abstain from meats, not to marry, and to abstain from meats. Well, that's a false abstinence there. The rest of these, though, are saying we need to stay away from something, not try to get as close to it as we possibly can. In preparation for this lesson, I listened to a fellow by the name of Eric Lyons. He was doing a sermon in 2014 at the Memphis School of Preaching on we need to stand firm against lusts. And so I listened to that. I thought it would tie right in with this lesson, and I believe that it did and does well. And one of the things he was talking about, and something that maybe you and I don't think about, and that is pornography. And a lot of times we think of pornography, we think of just absolute, triple X movies or something, where people used to have to go behind, fences and stuff to these places that, you shouldn't be around. And but there's also what's called soft porn. And what do we mean by that? Well, that's where people are skinnily clad and not really naked, as in not have anything on, but are improperly dressed. I wish Robbie Hughes was in here. We're about the same age. Me and Corey are about the same age. No, not really. I've got a lot of years on Corey. Nobody's my age. Well, when I was a younger man, there was a show on called Charlie's Angels. Do y'all remember that? And there was a particular photo. She is dead now. She was married to Lee Majors, who was the $6 million man, which nowadays is nothing. He'd have to be the $6 trillion man, wouldn't he, to be the same equivalent, I guess. But do you remember her name? She was probably the most famous pinup of my lifetime. Do y'all remember who she was? Farrah Fawcett. That's right, Farrah Fawcett Majors. She had on a bathing suit. She even had on a one-piece bathing suit, but it was pretty skimpy. And so, that's the idea that we're talking about with soft porn. People don't have to be totally naked to be in a situation where they're not properly dressed. One of the things that Brother Lyons was talking about, he likes sports, and his family, even when he was younger, have always subscribed to the Sports Illustrated magazine, And I always have loved that magazine, but, over the years, media has changed. And so now when his wife gets the Sports Illustrated, she goes through and rips out all the risque advertising, advertisements for, I guess, bathing suits and workout clothing, things of that nature. And so I'd really like to see that magazine after she does that, just to see how much is left, But there's one issue that comes out every year. You know what I'm talking about even before I say it, right? The swimsuit issue, where, swimsuits, you kind of wish that, sometimes with cases with young ladies, they just wear their underwear down to the beach because they'd be far more clad than they are in the bathing suits they have on. But men are not any, better than that. There's the idea that we should be properly dressed. Well, they just take the swimsuit issue, and his wife has a custom that she burns it. She doesn't even throw it in the garbage because she's afraid that somebody will get that out of the garbage in the house and, or even the one outside, so she likes to burn it. And he was telling a story, and I just thought it really, anyway, the issue came, and, one day, he was preaching on this. His two boys were with him at a place. He was talking about pornography and soft porn. And so a couple of weeks after that, his youngest son calls his mother in the middle of the day and says, "Mom, I've got to talk to you." She said, "Well, what is it, son?" He says, I can't tell you. I can't stay in the house. I need you to come home right now. And she was with somebody doing something. She was working. And she said, "I can't come home right this minute." He says, "I've got to get out of the house. I can't stay here." And she was like, "Okay, we'll go, in the backyard there over the fence to your grandparents' house." So he did that. And so she got with him and said, "What is it, son, that you have to tell me that so?" He said, "I found a copy of the swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated underneath Dad's nightstand." And he was so tore up about that. And I thought, how wonderful is that that kid's conscience is so, you know, but, you know, so then you're like, okay, Brother Lyons, why is there a copy of the swimsuit issue underneath your side of the nightstand? Well, come to find out, his wife had got that in the mail and said she didn't have time to burn it, and she didn't want to throw it in the trash, and she didn't want to go down to the end of the walk to put the trash. So she had put it up under his side of the, and I thought to myself, why would she put it on his side? But anyway, that's what had happened, and she was going to go back later, you know, and destroy it. But that's conscientiousness. And I tell you what, you got to have that nowadays, even just watching TV. You know, used to you're worried about surfing the internet. If you don't have your filters turned on, you can search, I don't care what it is. And there's no telling what you might get. So it's important to keep your filters turned on. And then occasionally you'll still have things to get through. But even now with television, you know, I think one of the worst things, and just to show you how bad it is, we have, I don't even know what cable company we have. It's like, don't ever get the cable company we have, whatever it is. But they were going to give a free, I think it was HBO or going to give you this channel for free, and you could look at it. And but they had a little warning on there. Be sure and turn on filters, you know, for the particular channels because of children. And I'm thinking, isn't that something? That you know these television shows are so sorry, these channels are so bad, that you have to give a warning. Look, we're going to give this out free, and we don't want your children, you know, you to not know that your children have access to this garbage that we're going to stream right into your television. Well, that's the day and age in which we live, and the Bible tells us that we need to abstain from all appearance of evil. Stay away from, get as far away as you possibly can. Do a, how would you say, a Joseph. When the opportunity arises, go the other way, because it's easy to be consumed with this. You know, and this is something I probably need to do more study on, because apparently it is far greater than it was, say, 10 years ago, and that is that we now have, even in the church, several groups that meet to deal with not Alcoholics Anonymous, not drugs, but with pornographic addictions. Apparently, when you look at certain images, it's kind of like gambling, and you know, it releases endorphins, and it kind of gives you I guess a high would be a way to put it, but it's not really a high in the sense of you're being impaired to drive a vehicle or something, but something that this chemical, and you get to the point where you want this chemical, it's something you desire, and so you continually go back to these various sites and so forth, just like the guy at the lotto or whatever you call those things, the slot machines. You know, he's going to keep feeding them quarters, and you know, it's they need that. They don't even care really if they win or not. That's not the thrill. The thrill is the process, you know. And as you become more anesthetized to that high that you're getting, it's kind of like the person on alcohol. A couple beers won't do it anymore. You need a couple beers and a couple shots, and then that won't do it anymore. You need a six-pack and a fifth, and then that don't do it no more. And so you need a couple cases, and so level goes up. That is something that parents, you know, grandparents, we too have to start watching. You know, it used to be a male thing. That's no longer. It's crossing gender lines, and what we need to try to do is encourage our young people to stay as far away from that as possible. If you happen to see some of that and you're stimulated by that, don't think that you're weird or that you're a sinner or anything of that nature. Flee from it, but just realize that God has programmed us in a way that we desire, people of the opposite sex. That's the natural thing. That's a natural thing. And you have to admit, parents nowadays, grandparents, that when your children are attracted to members of the opposite sex, you're almost relieved, aren't you? I mean, isn't that the time, the day and age in which we live, when you're happy that, your child knows what bathroom to go to, and, that they're comfortable with, members of the opposite sex, and they desire that because of the world in which we live. It's no different, really, than the Greek-Roman world of the first century. Sex was a problem then. Pornography was a problem then. Not as easily produced and distributed, but still it was there. And so they had to deal with it as well. And notice how Peter will package this. He says, abstain from these fleshly lusts. It's epithumia. It's what it drives you. And it's all carnal. It's built towards the flesh. And notice, it wars against the soul. It's a war, brethren. And not only are we at a war against Satan and denominationalism and false religions and all of that, but we're at war with our own bodies sometimes. Paul would say in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 that I beat myself up, if you will, so that I won't be. Let's take a look at that. Notice the language here. It's not expressed this way. Corey, if you'd look this up, I'd like to see the ESV on this. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. It's going to be the last part of that chapter. He's talking about Olympics, sports, talking about racing and so forth. And he says in verse 26, I therefore so run, not as one with uncertain, and so fight I, not as one that beateth the air. In other words, he says, I know the course that I'm on. I know that I got to run around the track so many times. I know that. And I don't just go around boxing at the air. He says, I know my opponent in wrestling or boxing. He says, I know what I'm supposed to do. And in 27, I keep my body under and bring it into subjection. Now, that's difficult language, to say the least, in English. Corey, what does verse 27 say there from the ESV? What's the translation there? But I discipline my body. Literally, I beat it black and blue is the literal language there. Discipline. I control myself. You have to. Temperance, the idea of self-control, is something that every one of us is going to have to go through. Yes, sir. That's exactly right. Here you got probably the greatest apostle, most well-traveled anyway, saying, I have to be concerned about this. This is something each one of us goes through. And don't think because you have a particular problem or an area that you're not strong in. I had a man one time tell me, we were talking about some things. He was having some problems in his marriage. And he said, it's women. He says, I've always had a problem with women. Women. I got a problem with women. Not women, but women. I have a problem with women. He says, I'm just, I desire women. It's a problem for me. And I was going like, join the club? What, do you think you're special? There's nothing special about that. That's your wiring, dude. All of us. There's not a man alive that's honest, I think, that doesn't know a beautiful woman when he sees her. Women know a beautiful man when they see him, and so forth. But seriously, folks, we know about in those realms. All of us have problems with women. All women should have problems with men. It's something you've got to control. And you've got to be particular where you lay your eyes. Notice in Galatians chapter 5, as we have these things that war against us, Galatians chapter 6, he's going to tell us about the armor that we need to wear. But in chapter 5, he's going to talk about that the Spirit desires things of the Spirit, whereas the flesh, the things of the flesh. Our spirit controls our flesh, and so it's important that we maintain that. Notice verse 16, he says, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. You see those things that you know you can't have. You know they're off limits to you, then they need to be off limits, and you need to control yourself. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit. There's a war there. And that's exactly what Peter's talking about. You're going to have those desires, but you have got to control that. He says the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary. They're diametrically opposed. Sometimes the Spirit knows to do one thing, but the flesh wants to do something else. These are contrary, the one to the other. But brethren, our bodies will not do, friends, our bodies won't do what our minds don't let it. Now there can come a point in time when that's no longer the case, when your body doesn't function properly and you can't walk or things of this nature. But, we need to be able to control our bodies and remember that you do have that control. Notice the works of the flesh. These are the things that we're fighting against. Which are these? Adultery, fornication, uncleanness, and lasciviousness. Every one of those things listed in this verse is dealing with sexual sin. It's a problem. It's always been a problem. It will always be a problem. People are not very good at controlling themselves. This is a powerful, powerful drive in man. What was it? I think it was either Gandhi or Buddha, one of those two guys, that believed in self, when you deprive yourself of everything. They asked him, how was he, what was the toughest thing? And he said if there had been one more lust or one more desire as strong as food and the sexual relation, he don't think he could have made it, is what he said. Those are powerful drives. You're going to get hungry. You're going to want to eat. Same thing with sexuality. And so in the church, we need to make sure that our kids realize this is out there, it's going to be there, and it's something that you need to control. And you don't want to lose control, but sometimes we sin. Sometimes we do things that we ought not. Realize that you're not weird, that other people have had this very thing. You think about David, his sin with Bathsheba. What a great man. There's so many good qualities that can be listed of David, but there's that sexual drive. It is powerful. And don't fool yourself into thinking that it's not, that it's something that you can control, and somehow you've got the magic wand and you can climb into the back of a car, or you can go somewhere where it's just you and your boyfriend or girlfriend, and that you're going to be able to control the situation. You're going to see that Peter is going to tell us, no. He says, don't even put yourself in that type of situation. Actually, it would be Paul in the book of Romans. Paul is going to say, don't even put yourself into a situation like that. And Romans 13. Look at Romans 13 with me, if you will. Because that's the whole idea. Be smart enough not to test yourself. Don't put yourself into a problem that you're not, you think, just don't put yourself in a bad situation. Look at verses 13 and 14 of Romans 13. Let us walk honestly as in the day. You don't have many people out doing bad things during the day when there's lights on and, the sun's out. Not rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, which is not in strife and envying. But put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provisions for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. That's one of the things. Amnon had a friend. He wanted his sister Tamar. He knew that would never work, but he had a friend who put him in a position to make provisions for the flesh. What we should try to do is to make sure we don't put ourselves in a compromising situation where we could lose control of the situation. And you may want to go into that. That might be something you want to do, but we've got to learn to control that, because it's a problem now. It was a problem in the first century as well. Well, I think we've pretty much covered the idea of fleshly lust warring against our soul. We're in this war. We need to put on the spirit, the armor of God. But notice verse 12. We're going to look at it from a positive sense. To attain. Having your conversation. This word conversation comes from the Greek word anastrophe. And it's the idea of behavior and conduct. It's the manner of life. We've said that many times, because you see that word conversation, immediately you think of somebody talking. But in the King James, it's just, 400 years ago, that was a fine word to use for the way you lived. Having your conversation, notice this word honest. This is one of those places where I wish they hadn't done this. I wish they had stayed with the same word. I'm sure there's a reason that they didn't. And I don't know exactly what that is. I even went back and tried to do a little research on it, but was unable to come up with an answer. Notice he says, among having your conversation honest. The word honest there, if you drop down, it says, they may by your good works. The word good there, they're both from the Greek word kalos. Kalos, and it can mean honest, it can mean good. I wish they had used good twice or honest twice. But basically what he's saying is have a manner of life that's good. Have a manner of life that's good among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers. Gentiles thought Christians were pagans. Not pagans, but heathens. they would, just like the Muslims today, they'd look at a Christian and say, you're a heathen. I mean, here we have this beautiful, wonderful statue of Zeus, the god, the father of the gods. This is the head god. And you guys won't offer sacrifice to Zeus? You won't offer sacrifice to Athena, the great war goddess? Or you just stick in the god that you want. They thought Christians were infidels, that they were non-religious, and they didn't want anything. They would accuse Christians of not being religious, of not being the kind of citizens that they ought to be, when in reality we know that the very opposite was true. But as they speak of you as evildoers, that they may by your good works, there's that word translated honest. In other words, the way you're living your life in that conversation, that folks, and notice, which they shall behold. The English Standard Version says, which they may see. The New American Standard says, as they observe. They're sitting there telling you you're not what you ought to be. But then they look at your devotion, and they watch how you live your life, and they're like, well, you know, that's just not consistent. They're not heathens. As a matter of fact, they're very moral people, and they watch that. It's something they can see, and so that old poem comes up by Edgar Guest that, I would rather see a sermon as to hear one any day, right? See a good sermon, hear a sermon. And so that's exactly what Peter is saying here. Have your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, talk about that Vacation Bible School song, this little light of mine, they can see that, they can behold that, and as a result of that, they are going to praise the God of heaven. They're going to glorify God in the day of visitation. Now, we spent a little bit of time with this word last week. I would like to know a lot more about it. It's the word translated bishop in 1 Timothy chapter 3. If a man desire the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. It's episkopos. But with so many words, it can have different meanings. I think what it's talking about here is the day of visitation. It's when this pagan, this Zeus worshiper, finally says, you know what? Oh, Ron there, he ain't such a bad guy. I've been watching him. And he doesn't seem to be, he doesn't worship idols, but he seems to worship God, and he seems to do what's right. He's a moral person. And so when Ron approaches said pagan and says, hey, would you like to hear about the God of heaven? They'll be more receptive to that, the day of visitation. In other words, when a person has the opportunity to hear the good news based upon your life, you're going to have an impact on them, just like we're going to see here in chapter 3. There's a woman who has a husband that's not a believer. And it doesn't sound like he's much of a Bible student either. But she's going to have an opportunity to win him, and how is she going to do that? By her life. By her life, which is exactly what he's saying here. Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles. Well, that's exactly what he tells the wife over here about the husband. That you may, by your, be in subjection to your husbands, verse 1 of chapter 3, that if any obey not the word, they also without the word may be won by the conversation of the wife. Because you're behaving yourself like chapter 1 or 2 verse 12 here, you're having that good conversation, that good manner of life, you can have an influence on other folks. And we know that to be the case. The Christian life is for good. We should be doing good things. I appreciate David Williams' prayer this morning when he talked about the world has seen and knows that the church is mindful of people, that we are concerned about folks, that we have good works. It's why we, Titus 3:5, unto love and good works. That's one of the reasons that's Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. But we're created to do good works. And when we don't, that's part of the problem. So a part of a problem. But we're to do good works, and we can see that folks see those works. Notice he says, which they shall behold on that day of visitation. Real quickly, if you'd turn with me to, I have it listed here, Luke 19:44, because that's where that word appears. That, if you don't agree with my interpretation there of the day of visitation, that's fine. You wouldn't be the first person. But notice in Luke 19:44, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knowest not the time of thy visitation. So what's he saying there? He's talking about the day of judgment. I do not believe that's what's being spoken of here, because they're going to have a whole lot more on their hands come the day of judgment as a pagan Gentile than they would. So, brethren, to abstain and to attain. Abstain from fleshly lusts and attain good works. Do these things where people will notice glorify the God of heaven. And it's interesting, on that hill of the cusp, we have actually left in verse 10 I hate using the term doctrinal and practical, because doctrine is practical. But he's going to stop talking so much about us as Christians and how we became Christians and so forth, and start dealing with our influence and how we did. In fact, verses 13 through 17 is going to be talking about the government. And I don't know about you, but will you be glad when November comes, the first week? Boy, I tell you what, the amount of commercials that are on right now with finger pointing and everything, it's so terrible. I'll be so glad when these are over. But we do have a duty and responsibility to the government. We have even a greater responsibility, I believe, than this first century. And Peter would say, you've got an obligation. You've got to participate, because he's going to say, submit yourself to every ordinance of man. He's going to talk about how we deal with the government. Then in verse 18, he's going to deal with the servant-master relationship. And boy, don't let that stop us, because after that, we're going to start dealing with the family. And so we're going to look at a lot of things that as Christians we need to be doing, and doing well is how we would want to do it. Well, brethren, that's our lesson for tonight. The encouragement to abstain from fleshly lusts. Hang out with Christians. Try to live your life with folks who are going to influence you for good. And when you happen to be out in the world with the rest of the world, let folks see your good works. Let them see Christ living in you. Abstain from the fleshly lusts. Attain to that Christian character that God would have us to have. And in so doing, take somebody with you. Take somebody with you. Take somebody with you. By that I mean to heaven. If you're here tonight, you're not a child of God, then, boy, you've got a lot to think about before you start worrying about all this other stuff we've been talking about. You need to get right with God. What does that mean, obeying the gospel? Obeying the gospel is the key to becoming a Christian. Not living a good life, not being honest, not you can just fill out with all the great qualities you'd love to have. That's not the key to becoming, to going to heaven, because you have sinned. All have sinned. They come short of the glory of God. You have to have that removed. You have to obey the gospel, which means being baptized for the remission of your sins. If you haven't done that, let me encourage you to do it. If in times past you have, but you haven't been abstaining, and you certainly haven't been attaining, because you cannot attain unless you're abstaining. You cannot live the Christian life and grow as a Christian if you can't give up the world and lust of the flesh. You've got to make a break. Let me encourage you to make a clean break. Don't go cut yourself back. Just go ahead and go cold turkey. That's how you deal with sin. If we can help you in any way, we encourage you to come. As together we stand and sing.